Yeah. Kära publik, cari amici in sala, gentile ambasciatore Perziani, dear audience, welcome to International Writers' Stage at the Cultural Center in Stockholm, Sweden. My name is Ingemar Fast. Those Who Walk Away is the title of a novel from the mid-60s by the master Patricia Highsmith. And that's what they've done over the years. The writers visiting Stockholm and this, the International Writers' Stage. They appear, they treat us with their brilliance, and then they walk away. They disappear. But let's face the fact, the wonderful fact, some of them do come back. They return. When I contacted Johanna Koljonen in May, asking whether she had the time and the possibility to lead a public conversation with tonight's guest of honor, the answer arrived very swiftly. It consisted of one word, in capital letters, followed by a forest of exclamation marks. It said, ja, yes, si. No wonder when the writer in question is Professor Umberto Eco. And today, this very day, his latest novel is published in Swedish, translated by the impeccable Barbro Andersson, titled Begravningsplatsen i Prague, and published by Brombergs. So, the audience, it's time for me to say the following. Questa sera un pubblico da tutto esaurito aspetta il nostro ospite con impazienza. Caro Umberto Eco, bentornato da noi.
Your Italian is perfect. Yes.
Thank you.
Ingemar, kan jag få klockan? Jag lämnar den på bordet där bakom. I said I would not be nervous, but I clearly am because I forgot the watch backstage. It is wonderful and terrifying to see so many of you here tonight. Terrifying to me, not terrifying to Professor Eco, who is used to this, of course. Thank you. We are here to talk about this novel primarily, the Prague Cemetery, Begravningsplatsen i Prague. And I will just very briefly tell of the content of this novel to those of you who haven't had the privilege of reading it yet. This novel follows the diary of a man who has forgotten who he is. Some of you may say, I know that. Yes, yes, but it's not the same. The man turns out to be a forger and a spy. He's called Simon Simonini, and he's plagued by a man of the church who keeps coming into his apartment and making notations also in the same diary. We follow Simonini's life and realize that he has been at the edges of many historical events, ranging from Garibaldi's invasion of Sicily to the Dreyfus affair. And at the same time, this novel tracks the genesis of an idea of one of the most notorious conspiracy fictions or conspiracy frauds of all time. And I don't think it's a secret to say which one it is, so I will. It is the Protocol of the Elders of Zion. In Swedish, of course, this is known as Sions Vises Protokoll, and it was also published here in Sweden in the 30s as a serious tract. So I would start with a childish question, perhaps. but a question, I mean, it is a question that may be childish to ask about this novel, which is about the social construction of truth. How much is true?
Everything. No, I'm sorry, but everything in this novel is historically true, because all the characters are real persons that really existed and that said exactly what they say in my novel. So I made only a patchwork of existing things. So I was a plagiarist, copying texts that were already published. And even I say in the final note that the only invented character is Simonini, but he is invented in the sense that I attribute to him many different deeds that were done by different persons, but everything he does really happened. So it is a summary of real crimes or forgeries. And in this sense, Simonini is more true than all the other characters, because my persuasion in writing the book was to look around, because I'm convinced that Simonini is always among us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I could quote certain persons of our time that are real Simoninis.
Yeah. History forgers of different kind.
History forgers and yes, secret agents. And if you read all the WikiLeaks texts, you see that they are produced partly by Simonini. I was very happy because my book was published 20 days before the blowing up of the WikiLeaks case. And one thing that I was saying in the book, it was an idea of Simonini. When you prepare a dossier, documents for Secret Service, don't tell anything new. Mm-hmm. Tell them what has already been published. Otherwise, they wouldn't believe it. If you read all the papers, the WikiLeaks papers, for instance, sent by American embassy to Hillary Clinton, they repeat exactly what was published on Newsweek the week before. Mm.
But at the same time, it offers a fantastic platform to put in things that are completely fictional and make them contextually true. And that also happens in this novel.
Yes, because an objection I received is, but if you tell that everything is false, therefore there is no truth. That is absolutely stupid. Because in order to say that something is false, you have to believe that something is true. Otherwise, you couldn't decide that something is false. So there is a fundamental truth in my novel. There's some fundamental truth is that everything I narrate was true. It happened. So I tell a story of fakes, but it is absolutely true that those fakes were produced, and they were lies.
You tell this story in three voices, and at least one of these voices, the dominant voice, Simonini's voice, his own voice, is very difficult, I think, to read. And in some ways, this is a novel of ideas in the 19th century way. It's also an adventure novel, so it's very exciting, but it is absolutely torturous to read. I found it very, very hard work, because all of these lies about... This is the most anti-Semitic book any of you are likely to read, unless you go and read the actual protocols themselves, except, of course, that is not the message of this book. That is just the word that Simonini's, his worldview is very anti-Semitic. And I found it so difficult, because normally when I read a book, I want to accept the premise.
No, on the contrary, you have to be repelled, pushed away. Hey, okay.
But it makes it a little difficult to keep turning the page and go, oh, I don't like this man. I don't like his opinions. I have to know what happens, you know.
No, I did my best to render Simonini a repugnant character, obviously. No, I am always telling the story that when my wife read the book once finished, because I never give my novels to read to anybody before finishing them. She said, "Oh, now I understand why in the last 2 years you were so bad." You were identified yourself with Simonini. Yes, it was the first time I tried to tell an entire story in which the protagonist was really an unacceptable person. But, you know, there are various ways to educate your reader. When I wrote the Foucault's Pendulum, somebody asked me, what do you like the reader, how the reader should react after reading your book? I said, I hope he or she would like to jump over the window. That's to understand that life is not so beautiful.
No.
I'm not Barbara Cartland. I am not.
I'm almost certain that nobody would make that mistake, sir. But you work with your novels for a long, long time. You live with the research, sometimes for years before starting to write. What was that process like for you, immersing yourself in this hateful material?
Yes, it was. No, it was. I cannot say it was disgusting, because even artist designs an horrible animal. He feels pleasure in representing an horrible animal. So even the idea of producing an disgusting character is a very pleasant experience for a writer. But it is true that for 5 years I had to put my hands really on a lot of shit.
If in the Swedish edition...
But with the spirit of a chemist.
Ah, yes, of course. In the Swedish edition of Turning Back the Clock, which was called, and we just looked at it, I think Kräftgång in Swedish. At the end, there are some texts that are about the protocols. But perhaps we could just present to those who are not familiar with these texts, what is the protocol of the Elders of Zion, and why is it still relevant over 100 years later?
That, if you want, is the scandal of the mystery that encouraged me to write the story. Because the human history is full of fakes and forgeries. The last one were the CIA papers demonstrating that Saddam was producing atomic bombs. It was untrue, but it helped to make a war. So we are always... but now we know that the CIA papers were false. It has been told, everybody has accepted the idea. There were great forgeries like the donation of the Emperor Constantine, and we know that it was a fake. Okay. But the story of the protocols is that published definitely in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century, 1905, in the 21, the London Times discovered that they should have been a fake, because they were partly or entirely copied by another book, which was not about the Jews, but about Napoleon III. So it was clear that it was a concoction. As a matter of fact, that was the first discovery, but they were made up not only with that book of Maurice Joly, but pieces of roman feuilleton, a lot of other things. They are like a Frankenstein monster, make up with different pieces of corpses. But when in any case, when the Times proved that they were false, and there was also a process in Geneva, from that moment they were believed more and more. And Hitler in Mein Kampf is quoting them as a true document.
And the Nazi machinery certainly saw this as literal truth.
And they are still published and republished. Not only they are in public libraries and in every bookstore in the Arab countries. This is understandable because there is an anti-Israeli reason. But here, you go in every specialized bookstore, those who sell Templars, Graal, things like that. You find the protocols. My German translator had to find a German version of the protocols too, since I was quoting part of them. So he wanted, and he didn't find them because in Germany it is forbidden to publish either the protocols and my Mein Kampf, which is stupid according to me. They should be published with footnotes and so on. But it was enough. He pushed a button on the computer, and the internet was full of German translations of the protocol. So they are still circulating, and every young person can find them and taking them seriously.
I think I was educated by this novel because, of course, I had heard the name of the protocols of the elders of Zion before, but I hadn't realized. I think when you go to school and you are being told about the world wars, one of the things that you are told is there is historical anti-Semitism in Europe for centuries, and then the Nazis come up and they pick this up and they are crazy and they multiply this exponentially, and then they try to kill everybody. But that is too simple. Of course, there had been an ideological landscape where this kind of intellectual anti-Semitism had a very clear place. And I think one of the most outrageous things when I went and Googled a little after reading this book is that there was, well, for instance, Henry Ford published a 500,000 print run of this book in the United States, but also that there was already an idea since the 19th century of a final solution. I think that I have always believed that the people who write hateful things, like the Protocol of the Elders of Zion, do so naively. They are naively bigoted. But your novel makes the case that this is an industry of hate, and it is written that this text was written with the very purpose to ultimately bring about a genocide.
Yes, absolutely. Or probably those who produced the first versions of the protocols were not thinking of the genocide, whether it is a malicious solution of mine. I make somebody to speak of the final solution, because even though probably at that time it was not very clear that the final end of the story would have been dead, because there was not a Hitler about that. But every kind of, not only of anti-Semitism, of racism, presupposes a sick mind. My Simonini is a sick mind. He is unable to have sex, is unable to have human affection. You have a sick mind. Sometimes the product of a sick mind can be politically useful in certain moments. It's not by chance that the protocols were finally produced in Russia, because it was a political problem to keep under control all the Jewish community, etc. So there is a sort of mixture between political problems and the contribution of the sick minds. Political problems, because in collecting all the material for my story, I came across, I must confess I didn't know it before, the texts of socialist anti-Semitism. Because at that moment, for certain socialist movements, it was clear the identification of Jews and capitalists. And for Toussenel, who was one of the authors of this kind of literature, there was an identification between Jews, capitalists, and Englishmen all together. Since he was a French, so he had the penchant. So you had there is a marvelous book that explains very well all these very complicated processes, the book of Hannah Arendt on the origins of totalitarianism. she explained very well. First of all, a story that must be clear. There was a turn in anti-Semitism with the French Revolution. Before, the anti-Semitism was a theological matter. They killed Jesus Christ, okay. But they were poor people. They lived in the ghettos. Sometimes it was useful to make a pogrom, to kill some of them, to steal the gold they had, but finished. Nobody believed that the Jews wanted to conquer the world, that they couldn't do that. With the French Revolution, there is the emancipation. They enter the bourgeois society. So it's no more the fiddler on the roof, but it is Rothschild. They enter the army. The Dreyfus case is that. The impossibility to accept the idea that Jews become officers of the army. In the Dreyfus case, if you read La Libre Parole, which was the journal, the magazine of Piedmont, which is one of my characters, that was the scandal. They couldn't accept that the army was polluted by Jews, and Dreyfus was a poor man who was chosen as a pretext to create a case, and they entered also. That's Hannah Arendt explains it very well in the literary society. The last case, Proust. At this point, anti-Semitism became no more religious but political, social. It was possible to be a socialist and to be anti-Semite. So it's a very complicated story. And
the intellectual anti-Semitism is introduced here, well, almost in Simonini's grandfather's generation. And that is actually a historical person. There's somebody who wrote one letter that can be said, the grandfather of the character. Yes, and that person
they
existed.
Must know that Simonini is called like that because there was a real Simonini. Because when the Abbot Baruel wrote his book, Mémoire pour servir à l'histoire du jacobinisme, he tried to demonstrate that the French Revolution was made by the people of Encyclopedia, plus the Templar Knights, plus the Freemasons, the same. But when he finished the book, a certain Simonini was allegedly a captain of the Tuscan army, wrote him a letter saying, but you have forgotten the Jews. They were the real author of the French Revolution. And so the modern anti-Semitism started with that letter of Simonini, who nobody knows if it was real or it was that too a fake produced probably by Jesuits in Rome.
In one of the characters, and I think you put these words into the mouth of Joly, so maybe he said that also. He says, you cannot change the world with ideas. I think that is blatantly wrong.
And until a certain point, because I don't think that the protocols have changed the mind of people. They were used as a weapon in order to reinforce pre-existing prejudices.
But they are also used as proof. They are also used as proof, so that they enforce them. I mean, it becomes a snowball effect.
Yes, but if there was not a pre-existing layers of anti-Semitism, the protocols would have not been taken seriously. One of the most well-known anti-Semitic writers, Nesta Webster, who wrote his book on secret societies, after that the Times proved they were a forgery, speaking of secret society all over the world, international conspiracy, at the end she couldn't deny that they were probably a fake. But her argument was marvelous. She said, okay, maybe they are a forgery. But since they say exactly what the Jews think, they are true.
And you let
that means to reinforce pre-existing prejudice.
And that is what you let many of your characters do in this novel. which is why it is so slippery to read. I think it's very difficult to protect yourself against this, because the moment they make something up, they start to believe it. All of the characters make these forgeries, and then they immediately start to treat them as literal truth. So also they let their own actions be guided by things that they have invented.
Even Simonini starts believing every fake he produces, then he believes it.
I think, and I mean now since you have called it a sick mind, I am worried to ask this question. But Simonini is also a kind of novelist. He reads novels of fiction and he creates new fictions from them in a novelistic style. Do you recognize yourself in him at all?
Something?
Do you recognize yourself in Simonini at all?
No, we make a clear distinction between fiction in the sense of novel and lie.
Yes.
Because in telling lie or making a forgery, you want that people believe that this is the truth. Narrating, making fiction, you pretend to tell the truth and you ask your reader to keep part in the game, and as Coleridge said, to make a suspension of disbelief and to play the game in which both pretend to take it serious, but you know it is not serious. You can participate with weeping to the story of Little Red Riding Hood, how the poor girl has been devoured by the wolf, but you know it is untrue, that doesn't exist. While when you lie, you want people to believe that what you say is true. So fiction is a very civilized way of lying with the complicity of your readers.
Oh, but you lie very close to the truth. Huh? With this book, which is true, your lying is very advanced, very close to the truth.
This is a particular book, yes. Because it's true, because when you narrate you make an historical novel, you introduce fictive characters, and your readers should know that they didn't exist, but you want that the people understand that the general landscape, on the contrary, is true. Let's take, in order to cite some important writer, the name of the rose. My readers know that William of Baskerville, Azzo of Melk do not exist. But they are encouraged to think that the general picture I made of the medieval monastery, of the fight between the emperor and the pope, they are true. So the fiction plays a double role. In this novel, probably everything wants to be true, except the fact that the antiquarian shop of Simonini exists in that street or not. So the things I ask the reader to take, to pretend to believe are very little. For the rest, I want they take it seriously. Yes, it's a new, I promise it's the first and the last time I'll do that.
I think it's interesting, though, that you have written two novels which are about the dangers of inventing conspiracies. Because this book, just as Foucault's Pendulum, they are both about people who invent conspiracies and start to take them literally, and it has bad consequences. So are you also, I mean, you keep returning to this topic. Have you thought about why?
Yes, that's true. Everybody has a particular passion. There are people who narrate only about sex. Okay, it's a very serious enterprise. Others narrate about crime or love. I am really interested by the paranoia of conspiracy, because I see it around me continuously. Since I am a skeptical person, I belong to the skeptical association of the scientific inquiry, or that's trying to demonstrate that there are no unidentified flying objects or circle in the fields. Well, I am always irritated when I see people always obsessed by mythologies. And so I tell about that. There are people, I repeat that my friend Moravia told about sex, all his novels. I am unable to I ranking with the great author of the Italian 19th century, Manzoni, who says, no, I cannot put sex in my books because there is so much sex around in the world that it is useless to put it in a novel.
But it's useful to put conspiracies in novels. And I think, I have a theory about your writing. What if you return to the topic of conspiracy, because the creation of conspiracy is a picture of bad science. As you said, it's the opposite of academic research. You take all the evidence and you make it believe, you make it mean what you want it to mean, not what it actually means. It's science without the criticism, and then it becomes fiction. And your writing is constantly on these borders, of course. I mean, most of your output is non-fiction.
No, you suggested to me in this moment a reason why I am so sensitive about all the conspiracy theories, or as it happened in the Foucault's Pendulum against all the occult, because I am a scholar. And as a scholar, I know that every scholar, be it a chemist, a physician, physicist, or a philologist, we have to control our assertion and to control the logical steps between one assertion and the other. If you read all these occult material, you see that every assertion comes by itself. There is no logical connection. And since all along my life I've been fascinated by stupidity. I'm not interested in genius. Okay, Einstein was a genius, but the stupids, because they are the majority. And so, in all the occult conspirational material, there is the logical structure of stupidity. In the Foucault's Pendulum, I make at a certain point Jacopo Belbo to talk with Casaubon apropos of the division of mankind in idiot, imbecile, or fool, and stupid. The idiot is the one who eats the ice cream, putting it on his forehead. Okay, they don't interest you. The fool of imbecile is the one who makes blunders, who says the wrong thing at the wrong moment. The stupid is the one who makes always a wrong syllogism. All the people of Pireo or cats are animal, or dogs are animal, therefore all dogs are cats. There is something wrong.
Yes.
You immediately but sometimes the stupid reasoning is more complicated. You have to control it many times. You feel that there is some stupidity, but it's not easy to find it immediately. Or all the material you find in this section. I am a collector of rare books on occultism, chemistry. They are all stupid, all based on wrong syllogisms. And so it's a scandal for me, and I want to denounce.
I understand, but I do have to ask, is there also a sense of a carnival for you to immerse yourself in this stupidity and speak with the voice of the stupid? Do you enjoy it secretly a little?
Probably I am stupid fundamentally, and so I feel at home there. No, there is people who like to study only snakes. There is one of the most important scholars who studied snakes. He has the face of a serpent. My God. I don't know if he started studying snakes because he had the face of a serpent, or the face grew up slowly in the sense in which when two persons marry each other step by step, at the end they have the same face. I don't know. So I was always fascinated by that. And I feel a sort of moral duty to explain that there is stupidity somewhere.
Yes. It strikes me now that Arthur Conan Doyle, who created, of course, Sherlock Holmes, he gave us the foremost literary champion of logical thought. But then he went and started to believe in fairies. Is there any threat that you will start to believe in conspiracy?
What? Apropos of Conan Doyle? No, I missed the point.
Oh, sorry. Conan Doyle, he gave us Sherlock Holmes, who is a rational thinker. But later in his life, Conan Doyle started to believe in fairies and to believe in the supernatural. So I worry now about you. Do you think you will go the way of Conan Doyle?
No. I am a real skeptical.
Good.
Conan Doyle, that's true. He was telling about the lucid mind of Sherlock Holmes, and then in the evening he went to make the tables dance. It was a spiritist. That was typical of many positivists of the last century. They spend a public life in supporting science against every kind of superstition. And then in the night, I met many scientists that secretly cultivated occult science. It's a sort of reaction to an excess of rationalism. It happened. No, I am the most impermeable people to every kind of superstition. I like black cats traversing the road.
I would like to ask now a little bit about memory, because this book is about a person recovering his memory. And so, of course, was also the mystical fire of Queen Loanna, the previous novel, in which a person goes home and finds his memory in some ways. In some ways he does not find it, but in some ways he does find it through printed matter, through books and the magazines and the albums of his youth. He can reconstruct the history that he has lived through and some little elements of his own participation. I think that it's a beautiful book, and I think it's a beautiful topic as well. And I wonder if you could...
It was the less successful of my books, because
really?
It was the easier one to read. So it means that my audience wants only difficult books. Loanna was too easy.
But it was also physically beautiful, I think. That also helps. But is it, memory seems to be something that you are concerned with?
Yes. Memory has always interested me, and as a collector of ancient books, I collect a complete. I have a quasi-complete collection of mnemotechnics, all the books on memory. Mm-hmm. Yes, and memory interests me because I am convinced that memory is soul. Mm-hmm. If you lose your memory, you have no more soul. Memory is fundamental also to go to paradise or to hell, because the hell is interesting if, when suffering, you remember of the sins you have committed. If you don't remember anything, you are like a fly to which for eternity you take the wings. And even in the paradise, I think that you need your memory to compare it with the memory of God, and then it's a sort of conversation. If you lose your memory, you are an animal, maybe less than an animal, because animals have a sort of memory. So, and it's very important for an old man to control continuously the functioning of his own memory. I am pretty proud to have a good memory, but I am discovering the strange mnemonical maneuver by which, getting older, you remember a lot of things of your childhood. Probably at the moment of dying, you will remember everything. I am waiting for that marvelous moment. But you lose some of the immediate memory. You go in the other room to pick up something, and when you have arrived there, you have forgot what you were looking for. And that memory is an important part of human life. But I would say it's a mere accident why the two books are about memory, because the first one was exactly about memory. I also sent the first chapter to a friend of mine who is working on brain at the MIT to be sure that there were those phenomena of losing the personal memory and keeping the cultural memory, and so on and so forth. With this book, it was an accident. You know, I try always to introduce in my novels some constraints. Art is based upon constraints. Rhyme is a constraint. To use oil instead of another is a constraint. I make you an example. I wanted that my Baudolino started with the siege of Constantinople. Why? Because I had never been in Constantinople, so I wanted to go there. And I needed a reason, a pretext, so I went to Constantinople, I explored Constantinople. But it was very difficult to start with the siege of Constantinople. Now it's very complicated to explain you why, but Baudolino was born in the middle, before the middle, in the 30s of the 12th century, and the Constantinople siege is the beginning of the 13th century. So I didn't know how to fill up a lot of empty years, but at the end that helped me to invent a given story, because I wanted to visit Constantinople. With that book, I wanted my character to go to the school of Charcot, the Salpêtrière. Why? Like that. I wanted to do that.
Interesting, crazy people.
Interesting. So I studied all what happened with Charcot. That's why I introduced Freud, because Freud was visiting Charcot at that moment, and so on and so forth. And Charcot himself was studying hysteria. He was the first to suppose that hysteria was not only a female sickness, but also a male sickness, because the name hysteria comes from uterus. Yes, so the first idea that only women were hysterical. And there were many other scholars studying the split personality. And there was the famous analysis of a certain woman called the Felida, who had two lives, and I attributed to all the things of Felida to Diane Rome. At that point, it was, I don't know whether indispensable, but very encouraging to decide that even my character, being a forger, had a split personality, and so I was obliged to invent Della Piccola and so on, only because I wanted him to visit Charcot. If not, the story would have been another one. Yes. So there is a lot of hazard, and you know. I mean that in a story you put something. This man must be a fisher. Okay. After that, he's obliged to do something to go to the river to fish, and not to fly. So the story goes by itself, and you stay, like Joyce has said of God after the creation, paring your fingernails, and you let the story to go on and to decide what must happen.
But it is.
So you are the first reader of your story.
Yes, but it is also so that the idea of memory and the reliability or unreliability of memory is very closely connected to these ideas of truth and historical truth that you have been working on. It's sort of personal analogy of that. So thematically, it seems that there is something that they do go hand in hand, even though you say it's coincidence.
But you have mentioned truth. You know, I am professionally a philosopher. And even though the Pope says that contemporary philosophers don't believe any longer in truth, this is false. And this is false. The problem of truth, it cannot be naive in the sense that we know exactly what is the case that finished. Truth is a matter of interpretations, but we must believe in truth, otherwise that's why I am so interested in fakes. You know, there are the two
yes.
aspects.
Well, as somebody who works in the mass media, which I do, I couldn't help noticing that the perpetuation of lies in this novel is very depending on mass media. The newspapers and scandal papers already exist in the 19th century. And I started to think that we who do media criticism and who engage with these things, we often presuppose that there is some kind of earlier golden age when the media reported the truth. And now the media have gone down and the media no longer report the truth. So I ask you, as an expert, has the media ever reported the truth?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean that hoaxes and the invention always existed from the invention of the Gazette in the 18th century. And so the media are a mixed product in which you can find real news, and you can find the falsities, and in order to cheat people. So media are not a category in itself. There are various kinds of media. I think that Pravda didn't tell the truth. So you see that there was a medium that was specialized in telling what is for a small sum, for a few euros, I can quote some Italian newspaper that do not tell the truth.
You could just tell us for free. We promise not to tell anybody. It's just us and the internet here.
So media, a mixture of everything. Mm-hmm. Also, what in Italy we are adoring the so-called Anglo-Saxon notion of news to separate opinions from facts. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you look at the New York Times, the opinions are in a given page, and the rest looks as a report of facts. But what happens when reporting a facts, in order to look very objective, they question two persons, one who says A and the other who says B. But why they did choose those persons and not others? That's already an interpretation. It's not reporting facts. So it's very difficult to believe that there is a newspaper that reports only facts.
But how do we go about being good citizens when the media is unreliable and we cannot go and see everything for ourselves? What do we do?
You have to read the 3 newspapers every morning, so you make a comparison. That is a good citizen.
Is that what you do?
Eh?
Do you read 3 newspapers?
Yes, at least. Otherwise, you don't know who is right. It's like with internet. If you look for a date in Wikipedia, you find the date. You cannot swear the date is true. You visit other two sites on the same subject, if all the three say the same date, and it is clear that one of them is not translating from Wikipedia, otherwise it doesn't work. More or less, you are sure that the date is true. That culture, confrontation, comparison. The rest is a superstition. That's why what we try to teach our students about.
Yeah, I was going to ask, everybody says we have to teach media criticism in schools. Can it be taught? Can media criticism be taught to children?
Yes, I think so. I want one of those who encourage the use of newspapers in the school but once again, to educate young people to read a newspaper means to educate them to read at least two newspapers, to make a confrontation, to see how the same event can be seen from two opposite point of view. There are many publications for teachers to how to use newspapers in the school. I believe in it. But now we have another problem, is how to educate to filter internet informations. Because with newspapers, you know more or less this is a rightist or leftist newspaper, and so you can measure. But internet, even if you are a very cultivated person, you can check and filter the information in your specific field. But in other field, you don't know which site is reliable and which is not. So if I check on philosophy of languages, let's say, or medieval philosophy, okay, I understand, I realize if the site is reliable or not. But if I have to check on chemistry, so imagine young people. My grandchild, now 11, is surfing all the day. They are unprotected, and there is no filtering practice, no filtering theory, because it should be taught in the school, but there is no teacher able to teach the filtering practice. There is only a way, in the sense in which the young artist went to the atelier of the old artist and looked how he worked, and they step by step learned something. So young people should be staying all the day with a more prudent teacher, exploring internet, and to see how the teacher say, no, I don't trust him. So a long and time-consuming practice. But it's a real tragic problem of our time, how to filter information.
Well, now you seem to suggest that perhaps it is a role for intellectuals, for instance, to teach critical thinking in the public sphere. And you have written in an essay about Norberto Bobbio, which is also in Turning Back the Clock, or you quote from Norberto Bobbio.
In the Swedish edition.
Yes.
Because they eliminated in the American edition, saying, but nobody knows Norberto Bobbio.
I didn't either, I have to confess, although now I am a huge fan. And in the 50s, I think he wrote that the task of kulturpersoner is the Swedish translator, people who work with culture. Their task is to sow doubt, not to reap certainty. And I always thought, and this just shows how young I am, I always thought that academia left certainty only in the 80s when postmodernism started. But certainly clearly there have been thinkers before, like Bobbio, who say, well, we shouldn't be about certainty, we should be about doubt. But if intellectuals go around dispersing doubt, or spreading doubt rather, who will stand for certainty? Where will truth come from?
Listen, if you are a good teacher, you have the task of educated people to doubt. But it doesn't mean that you have not to communicate also what is considered a definite truth. 2 + 2 makes 4. Okay, you know that the difference between the neurotic, the mad, and the normal person. The normal person believes that 2 plus 2 makes 4. The mad person believes that 2 plus 2 makes 5. The neurotic knows that 2 plus 2 make 4, but he's so upset because... Okay, that was a joke. Paris is the capital of France. And you have to teach also that. There are a lot of things that...
But those are natural sciences. Natural sciences. But what do we do outside the natural sciences?
But look, they have just discovered that maybe neutrinos travel at a higher speed than light. That is a way to produce a doubt. Science goes... science proceeds by falsification, not only by proofs. Is a continuous oscillation, because what can be proved and what can be or must be casted in doubt, that's science. So when Bobbio said that he was a political scientist and a philosopher, so he was not concerned with the fact, with the distance between the Earth and the Sun and so, and on humanistic affairs, it was more important to produce doubts than truth, because it's less evident what the truth is in political science. So, but it has to be understood in the way he spoke. Okay.
But I think for me this is a serious question, because we live in a world which is capitalist or even hyper-capitalist, and we have many of our governments are dominated by a sort of, I don't know, neoconservative or maybe anti-intellectual even idea that there is truth, which comes from the natural sciences, and truth is productive and it can be measured and it will make you money down the line. And then you have everything else. And in everything else, which is not useful, there is culture and there is also the humanities. And I think for you, I have to ask you, because your whole career, your academic career and your career as a novelist, has been such a celebration of the value of the humanities. How do we respond when people tell us culture is not important, humanities, it's not important? How do we say humanities also work with truth?
Is the typical anti-intellectualism which dominates a lot in the United States more than here. I have received a 500 pages book of a friend of mine, an American, who is speaking, is really American anti-philosophical country, and he tries to demonstrate that not. But there is the common idea that, yes, not only the American politicians, there was an Italian minister that it seems that recently in a meeting, probably to please his audience, said, we don't read books. And he was lying because he had a university degree, so he had to read a book in order to copy it to make his doctoral thesis. And our premier said, "It's 20 years I don't read a novel," which is evident from the way he tells jokes. Right. Okay. But so there is always in the political milieu forms of anti-intellectualism. Okay, you have to prove that knowledge is productive, but the argument I always use is that if Bush read books, he could have discovered that no country succeeded in conquering the Afghanistan. And the English were defeated, the Russians were defeated, Alexander the Great was defeated, so there is something in this country, the structure of the mountains, that makes that with a modern army you cannot win. It was enough if Bush picked up the telephone and called the professor of Harvard University to suggest him the right. He didn't do that. Okay. While Franklin Delano Roosevelt was an intellectual, before starting the war with Japan, asked the greatest anthropologist living in America at that time, Ruth Benedict, to write an enormous report on Japanese culture that then became a book, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. And it seems that since even generals were invited to read it, that made them to decide not to throw the atomic bomb on Kyoto. Otherwise, they would have done so, because they understood that in doing that in Kyoto, it was like to throw an atomic bomb on the Vatican City, you know, to destroy every possible relationship with the Japanese. So it was possible to be a politician and to have the sense of culture. But it's easier to pretend that there is only the elementary truth of natural science, which is false, because real scientists are always ready to doubt of the result. But it is the same ideology of advertising.
Oh, sorry?
Of advertising.
Of advertising.
Advertising says Tide washes better. That's true. You cannot discuss it. If you cast in doubt the assertion of advertising, the market is completely destroyed. So it is that elementary notion of objectivity which dominates in the business domain. But at a certain moment, you are defeated by reality, which is more intellectual than people.
I wonder, do you consider yourself an apocalyptic writer? Because in many of your novels, in one way or the other, the world is about to end or something awful is about to happen. And I thought, am I reading this into these books? Or do they say something about our time or about you? Or perhaps is it just that humanity always thinks that the world is about to end?
But you know, I wrote once in '64 a book called Apocalittici Integrati, and I called apocalyptic all the anti-mass media prophet saying that the world is so. And at the time, I was very, very critical towards those prophets of disgraces. Growing older, I am getting a little more pessimistic, and well, you say that maybe my books have this shade of apocalypticism. But there is something that saves me from being totally apocalyptic. I write the books instead of waiting for the end of the world.
Now we're back with Norberto Bobbio, no? Who says, do something.
Letts, a great man, in one of his aphorisms says, don't expect too much from the end of the world.
Still, we look at the news today, and it doesn't look very promising for Europe. I mean, for the European Union, it feels a little apocalyptic. For the economy, it feels a little apocalyptic. And even for some nation states, it seems that nations are now smaller than companies. A state is smaller than many companies, and states can go bankrupt easier than perhaps
banks. We are in
banks.
a bad moment. Yes, okay. But it is 3 months that I try not to meet my banker in order to still believe that they are all lies told by the newspapers. In this sense, I am not apocalyptic. I am an optimist.
Yes.
And I know that money is the shit of the devil.
Mm-hmm. I still would ask, what Do you believe that the nation state is getting stronger or weaker? Because nationalism is, of course, surging all over Europe.
Yes, until recently, I was believing that there was a decline of modern nations, in the sense that they were born at the beginning of the millennium. They were absolutely interesting for the development of the states. But now, since it was easier to establish a virtual contact between Barcelona and Warsaw, I was convinced that we were going toward a sort of an archipelago of regions and city, and that the national state will step by step decline. But in the last years, it seems that probably the national egoism is already very, very strong. What happened in Libya with all the European states trying to do each their own job in order to pick up the oil. It seems that there is a new insurgency of the national pride, which is pretty discouraging for me.
I would like to read a quote from the novel. I will read it in Swedish and I'll summarize in English. The quote is the Rachkovsky from the Russian secret police says like this. Patriotismen är brottslingens sista tillflykt. Den som inte har moraliska principer brukar svepa sig i en flagga, och bastarder stödjer sig alltid på den egna rasens renhet. Den nationella identiteten är den lottlösas sista resurs. Well, essentially the final sentence says it all. National identity is the last resource of those who have nothing. Do you believe that is true?
No, I believe that there is a lot of people thinking like that, and I have to confess that Rachkovsky was a real character, but since he was a spy, nobody knows what he exactly thought, so the thoughts of Rachkovsky are mine, and it seems to me that he reflects current opinion in the political life, even his eloge, his appraisal of hatred, which is hatred is a fundamental instrument for a political power to keep people united against somebody else. It is typical of dictatorships, evidently, but even of democracy sometimes. Think of the hatred against the Russian living in America and the hatred against Americans cultivated in Russia. They were important element to obtain an interesting result, the balance of the powers and the Cold War. But it was based on the depiction of the enemy as something terrible, horrible, and Rachkovsky knows this job, he tells it a lot.
But we always like to think that it's getting better. People are getting wiser, we are getting more rational. And then the protocols of the elders of Zion pop up again and as truth. So there seems to be some kind of tension where progress doesn't help. We can't stop stupidity, as you call it. We can't stop the conspiracies.
I think that there is a dark side human soul by which they will always... There is an interesting sentence attributed to Chesterton, because the source is imprecise. When people do not believe any longer in God, it doesn't mean that they believe in nothing. They believe in everything.
Yes.
And so it's typical of the secular mentality. But there are more people now believing in astrology than in the Middle Ages.
Is that just because there are more people on Earth?
Well, maybe yes. But there are a lot of people going to Medjugorje to look for the Madonna, even though the church has not recognized this apparition. And there are buses. There are caravans going to there. That's these people.
A lot of people are going to Rennes-le-Château because they read the Da Vinci Code and so on. Yes.
take it.
We had, but also this is a serious question because, of course, we had an act of terrorism in Norway this summer from a terrorist who was a conspiracy believer, who believes apparently very sincerely in a huge conspiracy of feminists and Marxists, and I think also Jews, and of course, but it's allied with, it's an anti-Islamic idea that he has. So he believes, for reasons that are very obscure to normal people, that the feminists are allied with the people who want Sharia law and so on. And he proclaimed himself a Knight Templar. So there it is again, it's the pendulum, it's the Foucault's pendulum. It's the same ideas are being rehashed over and over and over as reasonable truths. And I despair. How do we fight this? Because if we try to be rational, they will say, it's a conspiracy. You are lying.
No, but you mentioned terrorism. In Italy, we are out since at least 20 years. Mm-hmm. But terrorism reappears here and there. Once I wrote a sort of science fiction story in the period in which there was terrorism in Italy. I imagined that immediately after the end of the Second World War, all the fascists went to Turkey, and there was a fascist state in Turkey, and all the Western democracies were in war with Turkey. And I mentioned the names of the famous terrorists as heroes of the new war, fighting against the Turkish fascism, and the Pope saying, this terrible war. Imagine if we had 20 years of peace, we would be so happy. It means terrorism is a product of a period of peace. Mm. There are pulsion of violence in everybody. If you have a good war, you send them to war and you kill most of them, and that is in this sense I am favorable to parachutism, alpinism, all these people who kill themselves. Okay, let me stay to watch television and you fall down. Okay. But war, they were the futurists to say that the war was the only igiene del mondo, hygienic aspect of it. So I wanted to, if there was a continuous war after the end of the second one, there would have been no terrorism, because all the violent pulsion would have been oriented in another direction. So terrorism, I am sure that, at least in the Occidental countries, is a result of peaceful periods. In the Middle East, it is probably also the result of frustration, humiliation, and other things. But if Norway was in war with, let's say, Sweden, that man would have been a very courageous fighter for the glory of his country. You've written that the goal of the terrorists is to awaken a fire in the heart of the like-minded. So the terrorists always assume that there are great masses of people who believe the same things as they do. And if those people do not exist, then the terror will have the opposite effect, which is not revolution, but is upholding of the status quo. And there is something, this is like all dogs are cats now, but there is something stupid in the Norwegian terrorism, which I can't put my finger on, but he is a reactionary terrorist. He tries to fight change. He tries to prevent multiculturalism and things that have already happened. He tries to undo them through terror. And I can't put my finger on why that's stupid, but perhaps you can. No, you have not to believe that all the terrorists is red terrorism. In Italy we had both. We had the red terrorism and the black terrorism. That was pretty, no, there are two the same phenomenon from two different points of view. I find it very normal, unfortunately.
There we are.
Normality is not consoling.
No. But then how do we have hope? I will return to Norberto Bobbio here at the end, and he said it's better that you are a pessimist and you do something than being an optimist and doing nothing.
Well, at least you react in some way, yes. So what?
Will you give us some advice at the end before we finish?
Oh, read my books.
Ladies and gentlemen, Umberto Eco.
Please. Four schnapps glasses. It's 4 glasses for Swedish schnapps. Or grappa. Thank you so much. Umberto Eco and Johanna Koljonen.